There's a number that predicts whether you will build wealth better than your salary does. It is not your income. It is not your credit score. It is not your net worth, your education, or how many finance books you've read. It is 2 minutes. Researchers who study financial behavior have found that the length of time a person waits between wanting something and buying it is one of the strongest predictors of their long-term financial outcome. Not how much they earn, not how smart they are with money, just the gap. 2 minutes of waiting, repeated enough times, separates two completely different financial futures. That should not make sense. 120 seconds cannot possibly matter that much, can it? Think about the last thing you bought that you did not plan to buy. Do you remember how long you thought about it before you paid? Was it seconds, or was it minutes? Hold that number in your head. You're going to need it. For most people, the answer is somewhere under 30 seconds. The item appears, the want appears, and the payment happens almost in the same breath. There's no gap at all, and it turns out that missing gap is not a small detail. It might be the entire story. Here is the part that does not add up at first. Two people, identical incomes, identical expenses, identical financial knowledge. 10 years later, completely different places. Ask most people why, and they will point to willpower. One person had more discipline. One person just wanted it more. But here's the thing about willpower that nobody talks about. It is not a stable trait you either have or do not have. It is a resource, one that runs out over the course of a normal day, the same way physical energy does. By the time you are tired, stressed, and scrolling at 9 p.m., willpower has already left the building. So if financial outcomes actually depended on willpower, the richest people would simply be the most disciplined people. But that is not what the data shows. What the data shows is something stranger, something simpler. It is not about resisting the impulse at all. It is about delaying it. Resisting an impulse means fighting it in the moment, using effort, using energy, using a resource that depletes. Delaying an impulse means inserting a small gap and letting the impulse make its own case a second time. Once the initial spike of wanting has passed, one of these is exhausting. The other one is almost effortless once you build the habit. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Walter Mischel ran a series of experiments with young children and a marshmallow. A child could eat one marshmallow immediately, or wait a short time alone in a room and receive 2 marshmallows instead. The experiment became famous. But the part that gets left out of most retellings is the follow-up. Years later, researchers tracked down many of those same children as adults. The ones who had been able to wait, even as small children, tended to show better outcomes across a range of life measures, including financial ones, decades afterward. For a long time, people assumed those children simply had more willpower baked in from birth. But later work told a different story. The children who waited longest were not gritting their teeth and fighting the urge the entire time. The ones who succeeded were the ones who found a way to distract themselves, to look away, to think about something else entirely, until the pull of the marshmallow naturally faded. They were not resisting. They were creating distance. And distance, it turns out, is something you can build on purpose. At any age. Pause here for a second. Think about your own last unplanned purchase again. Now ask yourself honestly, if you had been forced to wait 2 full minutes before paying, would you still have bought it? Be honest. You do not have to say it out loud. For a large percentage of unplanned spending, the answer is no. Not because the item was suddenly worse, but because the emotional spike that made it feel urgent had already started to fade. The want was real in the moment, but the moment was doing most of the work, not the want itself. George Lowenstein, a researcher who studies how people make decisions across time, has spent decades documenting something called the hot and cold state gap. In a hot state, a moment of strong emotional pull, people make decisions that their calm, later self would never make. The gap between those two selves is not a character flaw. It is a predictable, measurable feature of how the human brain processes urgency. Retailers have known this. For longer than economists have had a name for it. Every checkout flow you have ever used online was designed by someone whose entire job was to shrink the gap between wanting and buying as close to zero as possible. One-click purchasing did not happen by accident. Save payment information did not happen by accident. The entire architecture of modern spending has been engineered deliberately, skillfully, to remove the 2 minutes. Notice that the next time you are about to buy something on your phone, just notice how few steps stand between the thought and the transaction. That noticing costs you nothing, and it is the first move in taking the gap back. Here is the anomaly underneath the anomaly. The companies removing the gap are not doing anything secretive. They publish case studies about it openly. They call the goal reducing friction. Reducing friction sounds harmless, almost helpful, like they're simply making your life easier. But friction was never the enemy. Friction was the thing standing between an emotional spike and a bank transaction. Removing it did not make your life easier. It made your later self's job harder. Pull up your phone right now. Open one shopping app you use often. Count the steps between seeing an item and completing the purchase. Most people find the number is somewhere between 1 and 3. A few decades ago, buying almost anything took a trip, a line, and a wallet. The gap used to be built into the world by default. Now it has to be built on purpose, because nothing in the environment is going to build it for you anymore. And here is what makes this even more interesting. The gap is not just about the item itself. It is about what the item is standing in for. When something feels urgent to buy, the urgency is rarely about the object. It is about the discomfort the object promises to resolve, whether that is boredom, stress, comparison, or simply the desire to feel like you have made a decision and moved forward with your day. The 2-minute gap does not just delay a purchase. It gives you a chance to notice what you were actually trying to solve. Try this the next time you feel that pull. Before you pay, ask yourself one question. What am I actually feeling right now? And is this purchase going to change that feeling or just interrupt it for a moment? You do not need an answer. You just need to ask. There's a quiet kind of discomfort that comes with sitting in that question. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that feels like a small, low hum underneath a perfectly normal afternoon. And the urge to buy something, anything, is often just the urge to make that hum stop. The 2 minutes will not silence the hum, but they will show you it was there. And seeing it is the whole game. You would expect that people with more financial knowledge would naturally have longer gaps. They do not, necessarily. Big surprise, right? Financial literacy and financial behavior are measured separately by researchers for a reason. Someone can understand compound interest perfectly and still buy on impulse at the exact same rate as someone who has never opened a spreadsheet. Knowledge lives in a different part of the decision than the gap does. This is also why lectures about budgeting so often fail to change behavior. They add information. They do not add distance. The reverse is also true. Some of the people who build the most wealth over time are not unusually disciplined. They are not people who never want things. They're ordinary people who built one small structural habit. A pause, a delay, a rule that has nothing to do with morality and everything to do with timing. They removed willpower from the equation entirely by replacing it with a mechanism. A rule does not get tired at the end of a long day. Willpower does. Richard Thaler, an economist who has spent much of his career studying exactly these kinds of small structural nudges, has shown again and again that tiny frictions inserted at the right moment change behavior far more reliably than motivation or good intentions ever do. The friction does the work that willpower was never actually built to do alone. So the 2 minutes is not really about the 2 minutes. It is a stand-in for a much larger idea. Wealth is not primarily built by earning more, and it is not primarily built by wanting things less. It is built by adjusting the timing between the want and the action, just enough for your calmer, later self to get a vote. Think about your own spending over the last month. Somewhere in there is a purchase that would not have survived 2 minutes of daylight. You probably already know which one it was. Tonight, before you open a single app on your phone, pick one thing you've been meaning to buy. Give yourself 2 minutes before you decide anything. Just watch what happens to the want. Now you know how to determine if you'll build wealth or not. It was never about the marshmallow. It was never about the money. It was always about the 2 minutes. The question is, what is your number? Drop your number in the comments. How many seconds did your last unplanned purchase actually take? And if this one shifted something, like and subscribe. See you in next one.